So I've been working as a psychologist for over a decade now and working on treatment modalities. And so many times I would be meeting with parents of kids and teens, and they would be asking for advice, support on how to manage resistance or how to manage emotional outbursts. And I would give them some ideas. What about this? What about this? And there were so many times where the parent would say, like, yes, oh my gosh, I wish I could just have you in my back pocket to say those things because I really do feel like that could work. And so I said, oh, don't worry, we'll write some scripts. So I'd send them home with scripts. And then a few years ago, I met up with Dr. Ashley Miller, who's a child psychiatrist in BC, and was talking to her about, this very issue. And so we decided to write a book about scripts and what to say to kids when nothing seems to work is a literal book of scripts based on the many, many conversations I had with parents of kids and teens who are struggling with behavioral or mental health issues. And so there are 14 chapters of literally like ideas what to say. Of course, you have to make it your own. But so not everyone feels comfortable with the book format. And so we wanted to have opportunities for people to learn like this too. And so this webinar is a distillation of like the nuggets that I've heard from parents were the most helpful. And so hopefully this very practical webinar gives you some strategies to maybe try something new at home or to refine a skill that you're already developing. But first, I'm going to invite you to do another poll. Think about the last time you had to manage a meltdown, whether your child is 3, 13, or 23. Think about the last time you had to manage a meltdown. How much time would you be willing and able to invest in order to avoid another such meltdown? So notice I say willing and able. People may be willing to do lots of time, but not able. And so how much time are you willing and able to invest in order to avoid another such meltdown? So we'll just give it a few more seconds here. Usually I like to get it up to 80% so that we can get a nice overview of what most people are feeling about. Almost there. Okay, here we go, 80%. So here we are. Looks like 15 minutes or more, people are willing and able, which is amazing. Next up, 10 to 15, 5, 10, then 2 to 5, and then one person, 2 minutes or less. Okay, so try to remember your number, and we will circle back to this in a little bit. Next, if you imagine your loved one coming to you with emotional pain, in our culture, we have been conditioned to respond in certain ways to emotional pain, to resistance, okay? But if you think about like your go-to, your conditioned go-to as a member of this culture, what is your go-to? And let me see about bringing in another poll. And this is my favorite poll to do because it's really incredible to see the lack of variability in responses. There's a top 3, and let's see if it's the same top 3 today. So when your loved one, when your child is in emotional stress or distress, what's your go-to? Reassuring, problem solving, distracting, asking questions, cheerleading, or focusing on the bright side. So we're at 39, 40%. Let's see if we can't get 80 to get a representative overview of what's happening for who. Almost there. And it is pretty amazing. I want to publish research on this, just on these polls, because we always get the exact same results: reassuring, problem solving, and asking questions. And the order can sometimes change, but it is always those top 3. So it tells us that our cultural conditioning is strong. Okay. I say this very nerdy thing. There's only one thing that I have in common with Vanilla Ice, and that is if you've got a problem, yo, I'll solve it. my go-to is definitely problem solving. And so here are the results of the poll, adding me in for problem solving, reassurance, problem solving, asking questions. And so you are not alone, people. Now, I'm going to invite you to engage in this activity with me. And I know that we're not live together in terms of being interactive, but let's see if we can't create some body-based learning opportunities. All right. So if we think about what's a typical response when a kid says, I don't want to, I don't want to come for dinner, I don't want to come in the house, I don't want to go to bed. Okay. It's very common in our culture, as we've just seen, to respond with reassurance, pleading, rationalizing, problem solving, warning of consequences. I know that that's my go-to 100% for sure. And so I'm going to demonstrate something using the statement, I don't want to go to bed, because that's often a statement that can be uttered across the age span from children and adolescents. And I'm going to invite you in a second to make your body into a resistant state. So it's like a hard feeling. And then I'm going to use like a typical response that we would say in our culture. And I just want you to notice what happens in your body, not what you want to kind of say back, not what you want to kind of think about, but just what happens below the neck in your body. All right. So I'll invite you to take a deep breath. Make your body into a resistant state. And then from wherever you are, say, I don't want to go to bed, and see what happens below the neck as I respond. I don't blame you for not wanting to go to bed, but you have to, sweetheart, you have to have a good night's sleep so that you can be alert for tomorrow. And, I told you already that if you wanted to watch that show, you'd need to go to bed, when I told you, and I'm not going to ask you again. Okay. Like, you really have to go up now. All right. Most of the time when we do this little activity, the majority of the people will say, oh my gosh, I felt resistance in my body actually increase. For generations, we've been taught strategies to respond to resistance that actually increase resistance. And it leaves us all feeling frustrated. And then it also can affect relationships. And so one of my missions in life, I'm not joking, especially in the parenting domain, is to help shine a light on this truth that the strategies that we have been taught over generations actually increase resistance when we start off with them. There's actually nothing wrong with reassurance, problem solving, and asking questions. It's the order in which they appear that makes the difference. But when you lead with reassurance, when you lead with problem solving, when you lead with consequencing, it does increase resistance. So emotions, including resistance, arise with hormones and neurochemicals. And when we ride the wave of emotion, it reduces the stress on the body by bringing the systems back to baseline. It's like being thirsty. Our body sends out chemical signals that lead to dry mouth. And the dry mouth tells us we need hydration. Emotions are the same. Emotions are signals, chemical signals that lead to a body-based experience that let us know that we need something. So feelings need to be felt and expressed in order to run their course and go back to baseline, resume flexibility. Just like once I drink water, the dry mouth goes away. Once the emotion is expressed and heard and supported in some way, the system goes back to baseline. And so that's really important to remember. All right, so now let's try it again. But this time, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the advances in neuroscience are showing we can do to help decrease not just resistance, but emotional stress or distress in our kids. So a friend of mine who is a neuroscientist, when I was asking him, like, how does this work? He described it so well. His name is Jonathan Balin. He wrote an excellent book called Brain-Based Parenting, along with his co-author, Daniel Hughes, who's a phenomenal family therapist and developer of attachment-based family therapy. And so what Jonathan says, is this: When the external environment puts into words the internal experience, the brain and body calm. And this is referred to as validation. There are many other definitions of what it means to validate out in the world, but in this context, the way I'm using it, this is what I'm referring to. When the external environment, which it means us, adult influencers, put into words the child's internal experience, it actually creates brain and body calm. So let me show you with the demonstration. So we'll try again that little activity, the I don't want to activity, but this time I'll respond with validation using the structure that I've developed as part of the model and the book. Okay. So I'll invite you to take a deep breath. Again, put your body in a resistance state and say, I don't want to go to bed. I can understand why you wouldn't want to go to bed because I imagine your body's not telling you that you're tired just yet. And it's probably making you feel sad that you're going to miss out on what we're going to be doing for the next hour. And because I know you really, really wanted to show me that new project that you worked on at school. And again, just notice what happens below the neck. You feel the brain and the body calm. It doesn't make it so that the kid goes from, I don't want to go to bed till to like, yes, let's jump right in. But it does increase flexibility. It increases calm, which makes it that they're better able to respond to your next statement, whether it's an emotional support statement or a practical support statement, including a redirection, even setting a limit. So that statement that I used was, I can understand why you might not want to go to bed. And then I said 3 because statements. So each of those because statements is meant to put into words the child's internal experience, even if I don't agree, even if I don't see it the same way. If I, with sincerity and with heart, put into words 3 reasons why they might not want to or they might be feeling a certain way, that's the ticket. That's what brings that brain calm. And so I'll give you another little trick to remember. Start with putting into words their experience. I can understand why you might feel, okay? And as you say that sentence out loud or to yourself, see which 3-letter word you might now be tempted to utter. I can understand why you might feel. If you're like most people, then the word but wants to come out. This is another cultural conditioning. That's all it is. We have been culturally conditioned to make statements like that. Yeah, I can understand that you'd feel this way, but let me correct this for you, or let me show you that that's not going to work right now. So with validation, a little trick can be from replacing but to because. So I can understand why you might feel, think, want, but is transformed into, I can understand why you might feel, think, want, because. And you make 3 because statements that reflect the child's inner experience. I can understand why you don't want to go out to recess because you're feeling cold, you're not sure who you'll be able to play with, and because the time goes by so quickly, it makes the next transition harder. We're speaking the potential experience of the other, even if it's not 100% perfect. When we do it with sincerity and heart, it does have the impact of bringing calm to the body and to the brain. Another way of looking at it is thinking about this elevator metaphor. So let's say a kid is upset, I can imagine that you might feel angry. They might be on the 12th floor of emotion. If you try to engage them with reassurance or problem solving or even rationalization, they're not going to be able to connect with you because all of that happens on the ground floor. When emotion is high, you lose access to your capacity to learn, to remember what you've already learned, to engage in rational conversation, and to engage in the creativity that's required for problem solving. So emotion is high. The idea is you want to bring it down so that you can engage with your child in that manner. It helps them to ride the wave and come back to baseline. And so here's these images. I can imagine you might feel angry. We're on the 12th floor because it really didn't feel fair when I did this. And because you were really looking forward to that next thing. And because it's the second time this happens and you really want to find another way of dealing with it. Every because statement brings the child down to a place of being able to engage. And so the doors are now open for emotional and practical support. So after you validate, then you can offer reassurance. Then you can offer problem solving, and it'll actually land because those doors will be open. So notice the doors on the left are like fully open. Okay. That's optimal. That's what we're going for. But it's possible that they don't fully open, that they just open a little bit, but that's okay because that will be more than what you had before, and definitely more than what will happen if you lead with the emotional and practical support, if you lead with the reassurance and the problem solving. So the take home message so far here is, if a child presents to you with stress, distress, or resistance, the best way to support them and to engage them in the ways that are needed in the moment are to validate their experience, validate the reasons why they might feel stressed, in distress, or in resistance using 3 because statements, and then following it up with reassurance and with problem solving if those are your go-tos. But there are other choices. And here I'll give you some other choices. So we're putting the whole system together here. Step 1 is conveying understanding of their experience. Prove that you get it with those 3 pieces of proof, those 3 because statements. And that's what we're calling validation. And then step 2 is to then transition to emotional support and practical support to help the child move through not just the emotion, but whatever the next thing is, including the behavioral expectation if relevant. And so here are some examples of emotional support sentences. It's going to be okay. I know you're doing the best you can. I believe in you. I believe you can do this. We're in this together. And then some ideas for practical support suggestion would be to, okay, now let's go, or suggest a distraction depending on what's going on, teach some skills, offer solutions to solve the practical problem. You can even set a limit here. So emotion coaching, which is what I refer to as these 2 steps, also includes setting a limit. It's just that setting a limit on its own is likely to lead to an escalation. But if you precede the limit with 3 because statements and emotional support, the limit setting is going to go far better. When you think about emotional and practical support, basically it's what you would say or do as a first impulse as a culturally conditioned member of our society when rested, well fed, and in a positive headspace. It's just that the order of operations is what's most important. And I know I've mentioned it a few times, but I just want to make sure that you have at least this one big takeaway. There's nothing wrong with reassurance and practical support, like problem solving. There's nothing wrong with emotional support and practical support, but it works best when preceded with validation, when we put into words the child's experience of stress, distress, or resistance. All right, so now what I'm going to do is a time demonstration, right? So I'm going to think about, let me just see, a really common, I don't want to go to dinner. I don't want to go for dinner. Oh, actually I did an I don't want to already. Let me just think here. Let's do an I feel so sad. Or I feel anxious. Let's do I feel anxious. Sorry. I'm like, I can't decide. Actually, that's a chapter in the book. I can't decide, validating the difficulties with I can't decide. So why don't we do that one? Okay. So kid says, I can't decide. I can't decide between this one and this one. I'll set up my timer. Let me just take a deep breath to orient. So pretend that you're a kid who is at the dentist and they get a choice between 2 toys from the treasure box for having done such a good job. and they are really stuck and stressed about what choice to make. And they say to you, I can't decide. And we could all agree probably that a typical response could be like, both are great, just choose one, we have to go. Okay, so now let's try it with the model. Take a deep breath. I can understand why you'd have a hard time deciding because you really like frogs and the elephant looks really cool. And because you might feel like if you choose the frog, you'll regret the elephant. And because you really wish you could just take both. I want you to know that I trust that you can make this decision and I can help you too. Why don't we think for a second what the best ideas are about the frog and the best ideas are about the elephant? All right, 40 seconds. Now, it takes practice to be able to kind of do it free flowing. And you'll see even there, like I stuttered a little bit. I was like, oh, yeah, what am I going to say about this frog and elephant? Like, who knows? I forget what it's like to be six and struggling to choose between two things. But it takes so little time. It can happen so quickly. So that's one idea. Now, let me give another example for maybe an older kid who doesn't want to go to school. Okay. So, again, just take a deep breath. And we imagine a teenager says, I don't want to get out of bed. Okay. And I'll start. I do not blame you for not wanting to get out of bed because bed is the coziest place on the planet. And I can imagine you want to stay there all day. And because if you do get out of bed, it means that you have to face life, and life today includes a test. And because I imagine that there are so many other things that you'd rather be doing, and it just feels a little overwhelming. I'm going to help you. I know you'll be able to get out of the bed and face the day. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go get your breakfast started, and then I'll come back and help you to get moving. All right. 36:57. So, 37 seconds. And so, think back to the poll. How many minutes would you be willing and able to invest? We're talking about 40 seconds. It doesn't mean that you might not do more than one round of it. Absolutely. But engaging with your child in this way, whether they're 6 or 16, is going to significantly reduce the chances that things escalate into a meltdown. The biggest hurdle is to remember to start off with this approach. And so many parents that I work with, they'll write down little scripts, to practice, so that that practice makes it more likely that in the moment they're going to be able to remember the technique. How does it work? So let me just tell you a little bit about the neuroscience of how this approach works. Okay. In the moment, in the actual interaction, when you engage with your child using this approach, validating with those three because statements, offering a couple emotional support sentence and a practical support suggestion, the verbal and nonverbal signals that you're showing trigger a release of calming neurochemicals from the hypothalamus, which then bind to receptors in the emotional center of the brain. So let me just explain that to you in simpler language, because that's how my brain works. These are the words from Jonathan Balin, actually. So when you attend to your child with heart and with sincerity, like this, like, oh, I could understand why you would feel because. And if they're angry, then you're not going to go, oh, you're going to be like, yeah, I can understand why you'd feel angry because, right? You match or mirror the energy, not the anger, just the energy. Those verbal and nonverbal signals, so the script and the way you say it, trigger a release of calming neurochemicals from the hypothalamus, which is basically like grand central station in the brain. And those calming neurochemicals find their way to the limbic system, which is the emotional center of the brain. So imagine what you say and how you say it actually brings calm to the brain. It doesn't mean that it's going to go from 5-alarm fire to clear, but it will create more flexibility so that when you then offer the reassurance and the problem solving, they're more likely to be able to come alongside. The other benefit of this approach, and I can't underline this one enough, is that when you engage in this manner with your child repeatedly, you make it your second language when you're connecting with each other. Over time, when you do this, when you engage with them in this manner, your efforts will promote brain building activity to create connections between the frontal lobe and that limbic system again. So the frontal lobe is where you have the capacity to rationalize, to use creativity for problem solving, and all kinds of really good higher order thinking skills. And so when you, the parent, the adult influencer, engage using this strategy, it promotes brain building activities. So if you remember the Fraggle Rock, Fraggles, there were these little construction people that came out. So imagine, and they're building a bridge from the higher order thinking area of your brain to the emotional center. And that is what we refer to as the pathway for self-regulation. So what we want for our kids, what I want for your kids, what I want for my kids is for them to be able to regulate themselves, right? So we want to help regulate them, but ultimately we want them to regulate themselves. And the best pathway for self-regulation is through co-regulation. So every time you are able to help them to move through stress, distress, or resistance, in particular using this approach, you're supporting the kind of brain growth that leads to more and stronger connections between that higher order thinking part of the brain and the emotional brain, which in effect represents self-regulation. And it doesn't matter how old we are, that process can be constructed. And so don't worry if your child is older and they struggle with self-regulation. This co-regulation approach will help them to internalize that capacity themselves. It just takes some time. Some kids need more time than others. Why? Because some kids don't have as many receptors for those calming neurochemicals, and so they need more continuous flow of validation and support. Other kids have a more active amygdala, which is the core of the emotional center. It's kind of like the alarm bell of the brain. They have a more active alarm bell, which means that they need more flow of calming neurochemicals in order to respond to those more frequent experiences of stress or distress. But the good news is every year a child grows. There's a maturation process in the brain. The brain matures and makes it so that they are better able to have experiences of emotion without totally going offline, especially when they're receiving this kind of support. So every year will be better than the next when it comes to emotion regulation. And here are some little images to kind of show. So in the moment, when we use the strategy live in the moment, it is like putting water on the fire of the brain. That's the hypothalamus, the extinguisher. And the water is those calming neurochemicals, and they flow down to the limbic system, to the emotional center of the brain to calm down that fire. Now, we don't need to put the whole fire out in order to navigate the space, just enough. And then as we engage with this technique over and over again, it's like we're building that bridge. It's like we're putting a brick on the bridge from the frontal lobe to the limbic system, creating that much stronger pathway for self-regulation. And so I really appreciate these cartoons so much because as you start to engage with your child using this technique, you'll be able to see in their eyes, like, oh my God, they just went down a little bit. Like that elevator went down. I saw it, which is very reinforcing. But I just want people to know that, it's not a perfect solution. So it's not going to help them come down from 100 to 0. But in my years working as a psychologist, working with families, and also researching everything I could get my hands on in order to find tools and techniques to support this process, this is what I found that is the simplest and the most effective. Warning, however, If you are triggered, so if you are in a state of stress or distress yourself, it'll be harder for you to remember the technique, and you'll be more likely to engage in more impulsive knee-jerk reactions. And so that's okay. Everyone's human. If you do end up reacting from a knee-jerk response place, all you need to do is when you're calm, you go back and say, you know, when you said this is what I should have said. It's actually amazing the impact that can have in parent-child relationships. First of all, because we're moving now from an understanding that you shouldn't apologize to your children, which is what many of us were raised in, to actually apologizing to your child in a way that's regulated, and solid, can actually be an amazing way to role model to our children how we can make amends when we're not acting in our best selves. And it's it can still have the effect of promoting that co-regulation, and so we call it a do-over. So if you forget, or you make a mistake, or you're triggered yourself and you acted from a place of trigger, don't worry about it. When you're calm, when they're calm, you can have a do-over. It can be as powerful or more powerful, because now they're seeing how much the relationship means to you, how healing it can be to acknowledge when there are ruptures, and that it's never too late. And truly, it is never too late. I've supported parents to heal ruptures that were 30 years old using a similar approach, and it can be really, really effective. But one thing, it can be useful to know your triggers, so that if they happen, you have more awareness of the likelihood that you might fall into a knee jerk response. And so we have a little poll here for you. This will be the first time I do this in a poll setting. And so it'll be really interesting. Which scenario do you think represents your strongest trigger, where you're most likely to respond in a way that maybe doesn't represent your best self? All right. So we're slowly getting up. We have about 30 people. Almost there. 65. Let's see if we can't get a few more before closing the poll. And great. Let's share the results. Okay, so the number one trigger is rolling their eyes, followed by using colorful language, that they don't want to speak to you, or that they show up, really tearful. And so, great. The best thing to do here is to know your trigger. But I'll just, as an aside, I'll say really quickly that actually eye rolling is a sign of respect. And it blew my mind when I realized this. And I'll just to give you a really, really quick anecdote, seeing as that was the one that people responded to the most strongly. If anyone has two dogs in their home, if you put a bowl of food down, there's always one dog who's going to eat from that bowl of food, while the other kind of whimpers and whines in the background, wanting to eat. Why does that dog in the back never lunge, attack, or bite the dog who's eating from the bowl? Because that dog knows its place in the pack, knows its place in the hierarchy. It whimpers and whines and shows displeasure, but it doesn't bite. And so rolling of the eyes is quite similar. In our culture, there are not a lot of ways that we support kids to show anger in an active manner. And so rolling of the eyes is a way to express that distress, that displeasure, that feeling of unfairness without biting. And it's funny because my stepdaughter, when she was littler, I would always tell her about, like, emotions are so important, and you have to feel all your emotions. I mean, I'm an emotion focused therapist after all. And one day she said, because she was really angry, and one day she said to me, "You always tell me that it's okay to feel angry, but you say, Sydney, you can be angry, but don't stomp your feet. Sydney, you can be angry, but don't slam the door. Sydney, you can be angry, but don't roll your eyes. Don't yell. Don't say unkind things, blah, 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 blah." And the message here was, how do you want me to show anger if we're not allowed in all of these ways? It was such a turning point for me, because I was like, oh, right. anger was a trigger for me because I grew up in a culture where anger was just not okay, and not okay for me too. It wasn't okay for me to express. And so rolling the eyes is actually a respectful show of the understanding of the hierarchy in a way that also releases some of the stress and distress related to the angry response. So hopefully that helps. All right. In summary, this approach that I call emotion coaching, although in the book I call it putting into words and getting practical, not a perfect solution. Underscore that 10 times. Because otherwise, if you do it and it doesn't always work, you might feel like abandoning. But this is the kind of strategy where, it really has to be tried often. Not a perfect solution, but can lead to an increase in cooperation, including with limit setting, avoiding escalations, decreasing urges, de-escalating situations, regulating, and then finally internalization of the capacity to self-regulate oneself. And that is really, really amazing. And so if any of you are watching this and feeling like, oh no, I've never connected with my child in these ways before, no wonder they're struggling, it's all my fault. No. If we were live and you would see that everyone in our culture leads with these knee-jerk responses, it would be impossible to blame yourself because that's what we do. Not doing it didn't lead you here. Otherwise, we would all have those struggles. But doing it can get you out. Doing it is a pathway towards improved mental health for sure. We just need to practice using, and I developed a script builder, and be mindful of our pesky triggers that will sometimes, get in the way of our ability to show up with this strategy in the way that we want. So this might be the most important slide of the webinar. If you remember one thing from today, this is what I would love for you to remember. Use of logic, reassurance, and redirection without validation, without first putting into words your child's experience, is like banging your head against the wall, and it leaves everyone feeling frustrated. So the take-home message here: emotion, including resistance, is like an elevator. And when it goes up, 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 it's impossible to connect with your child using reason. It's going to be really, really hard to redirect them or engage them because they've got to be on the ground floor, or at least closer to the ground floor, in order for that to happen. And this approach that I presented today, it's like the pulley to bring down that child or teen down to the ground floor where they are more able and likely to engage with you in the ways that are going to support a forward movement. And so if you're interested in learning more about this approach, if you want to have access to scripts, you can check out the book, What to Say to Kids When Nothing Seems to Work. And also there are, in addition to the mentalhealthfoundations.ca website, you can check out my website under the events tab. There are parent, teacher, and clinician workshop opportunities where we dive in more deeply into the approach, and there are opportunities for script building and practice. And so I'll stop it there for now so that there's opportunity for questions if people have questions. And again, thank you so much for having me today, and for everyone who showed up today. It really is such a pleasure to engage with people who have interest in the similar areas that I do, especially since I really want to create a culture change around this whole thing about leading with reassurance and problem solving. So thank you. Any questions I'd love to answer.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Adele, for sharing with us today. Oh my gosh, my brain, I could feel the synapses growing and firing as you were talking. In particular, I was struck with not just the validation, but with heart and sincerity. So the way in which we speak to our kids. So I think that for me is definitely a takeaway as well. In addition to that script, it's also how do you come across? What is your energy? How are you meeting?
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to not be sarcastic or, kind of annoyed or in a hurry. It doesn't have
Right.
to be perfect though.
Right, absolutely. So we've got a number of questions, but I was wondering, firstly, where does empathy kind of fall into this when we're talking about validation? Um,
Yeah. So empathy, if you think about the definition of empathy, it's imaginative entry into the world of another.
mhm,
And so it's almost like a precursor to validation that you can do quite quickly. In the book, we refer to it as building a bridge. So if you imagine there's two islands, there's parent island and child island. You want to build a bridge from parent island to child island. So to imagine what might be going on over there. And that's what helps you to develop those because statements actually.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so it can be as brief as 3 to 5 seconds, like, what good reason from my child's point of view could make it so that they're behaving this way?
mhm.
And it's tricky though, because when you have like a 4-year-old who's freaking out about socks,
Right.
it is harder to be an adult and enter imaginally into the 3 4-year-old's experience, but you can do it, like, oh yeah, I can imagine you'd be upset about those socks because the line is cutting across your toes, and
Mhm,
because it's not feeling very comfy, and because you wished you had the purple ones.
mhm.
So empathy is the precursor for the because statement.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification. We've got quite a few questions here, so we'll do our best to answer them. And if we can't get through them all, then we'll see what we can do afterwards. We've got a question as far as how does this relate to correcting behavior? And say if the child is having a problem with biting other children. So stress behavior is not a misbehavior, but what can we do to help in behavioral problems? Is this
So
something?
I would do so first of all, you deal with the behavior, in the moment. Afterwards, I would actually have I would try to use the same approach with the child. I can understand why you would want to bite, because when you're really upset, your body just wants to do something with those upset feelings, and when you bite, it does give you a break from the pain or the bad feeling.
Mhm,
And then you move into, so the because statements, and then you move into, but I know that you can have those feelings without biting. I
mhm,
believe
mhm,
you, and I'm going to help you. And so next time you're in that place and you want to bite,
mhm,
this is what we're going to do instead. You're going to ask for help, or you're going to say, I want to bite. And so that I can help you manage that big feeling, together with me. So
mhm,
you
mhm,
can absolutely use the structure with behaviors. In fact, I just did a training for teachers, and
mhm,
one of the things that we do is we validate the urge to get up out of the seat. I can
mhm,
understand why you get out of the seat, because you've been sitting for so long, and because you know that there's still 15 minutes left, and because your legs just want to move. We're almost done. We're going to get through it really quickly. Why don't you give your legs a big stretch, and you'll see it'll release the tension. So the three because statements, the emotional support, the practical support.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. And this is what I love about your presentation as well, Adele, is that you've brought it into adult influencers, so teachers, grandparents, foster parents, aunties, uncles, all of us, and for any age, as you'd mentioned, which is really refreshing as well. That this is something that it even strikes me that this is probably something that could help with adults in
Well,
relationship.
yeah. So one of the chapters in the book is between co-parents, because something that often happens is that there'll be one parent who's like tougher and one parent who's softer. And when that happens, the parent who's tougher usually criticizes the softer one, and the softer one usually criticizes the tougher one, and it actually polarizes the dynamics. And so rather, you want to validate the other's position in order to meet in the middle, like in a
Mhm.
more flexible manner. So absolutely, it can be used across the lifespan, including with co-parents.
Right. Great. What about a child who's constantly negotiating no matter what is being asked?
Yeah.
How
So
can we
what
apply this?
I would propose is use the approach. It will reduce the attempts at negotiation,
Hmm.
because what's going on is that when it's a brain hack, it really is a brain hack.
Mhm,
When you put into words why they might want the things that they want,
mhm,
regardless of whether or not they want their brain to calm, it will, which means that there'll be less fight in them. And when you end up saying your bottom line is more likely to be accepted. And so, if someone is constantly negotiating, it might be an indication that you're in a debate, you're in a volley,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and this takes the debate right out of the equation because you're speaking their side. You're like, yeah, I can understand why you'd want this because of this and because of this and because of this. And it probably doesn't feel fair. And then you offer emotional support, reassurance, or communication of belief in the other. And then you speak your bottom line, which is practical support. You probably will need to do another round because anytime you set a limit, it does activate resistance. But it should go better than that whole debate thing. The debate often shows up when the child or teen doesn't really feel heard,
Mm-hmm.
which is hard in our culture, in our world, because like we're working, and now with COVID, like it's just there's just so much to have to deal. And so trust me, I'm not criticizing anyone who's not sitting down to give fulsome emotional support to their kids during these times, but that is sometimes one of the markers of maybe needing like a 5 or 10 minute conversation to help that child feel heard so that it can calm their brain and they can be more flexible.
Right. Yeah. Okay. This has all been so wonderful. I'm excited to start to consider how we can bring some of your strategies into the work that we do, Adele, as I think that this is really, it's groundbreaking, quite honestly.
Aw.
So really, really appreciate your time today. I know we weren't able to get to everybody's questions, but I've been able to record them. So hopefully we'll be able to answer folks' questions at a later date. Before we head out, I did want to just alert folks to this promo that we have on for 15% off of our training. So I'll just very quickly share my screen once again. And in the meantime, I wanted to thank you, Adele LaFrance, once again for being here with us and for sharing all of this incredible information. Yeah, I look forward to further collaboration as I think
Yeah,
that.
and I took a peek at some of the questions just as you were chatting there, and actually many of the answers will be found in the free resources at the mentalhealthfoundations.ca. And so it just takes a little bit more time to kind of wade through them, but I
Right.
do feel confident that a significant number of those questions can be answered there. Sorry we weren't able to get to them all.
Yeah, thank you. And you know what I'm left with? It's practice. It's practice, practice, practice to get this kind of thing going. And so thanks for setting us up in such a good way. And for everyone else who's been with us today, thank you. We look forward to your feedback. So please complete your survey if you can. And you'll get your recording, you'll get the PDF courtesy of Adele and some handouts as well. So we'll look forward to that, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great day.